Well, we're going to look at this visual history that you've done, a term I'm not that familiar with, but we're going to learn more about it. But the first American volunteer group of the Republic of China Air Force, nicknamed the Flying Tigers, was formed to help oppose the Japanese invasion of China. And this was about 1941. Is that when Chenault went in with his team, or did he build it over time?
What happened is my guy, this guy, Billy, Mac McDonald, went in 36. He was a friend, a wingman to Chenault in the American Army. He went to China in 36. Chenault followed him in 37. They trained the Chinese Air Force for several years until the Japanese Air Force had devastated them. And then they brought in the Americans. They brought in a volunteer group, the ABG, or the Flying Tigers. And Chris? 41. 41. Yeah, they arrived about that.
I knew that answer.
I always check with Chris, though. He's the keeper of reality.
So, okay, you're going to talk to us about this visual history type concept. Obviously, there's been a lot of these made, but I don't think it's really been called anything. It was just like a memory book, or whatever it is. But what you've done here, is this a concept that you created that term for?
I think I did. I can't swear. So maybe somebody else used it. But when I was explaining it, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this. But when I was explaining it, I was thinking of it as storytelling the way that filmmakers tell stories. Because of circumstances, we didn't have the option of ponderous scholarly tome with complete footnotes. We had what we had, and the visuals on it were unbelievable. So I kind of made it up, and it kind of looks like a comic book, so sometimes I refer to it as the comic book.
It does not.
And the scrapbook, it's been accused of being a scrapbook. That's probably the closest thing, where people carefully compose pages to tell stories about a specific event. I would say scrapbooking is close to this. It's another form of it.
Well, I suppose you'll tell the folks a little bit later in your story that you ended up in Alabama for a very long time writing this book with the family, because it just couldn't be done over the phone. So she was down there for how long?
A year.
A year, putting this book together. That's why Barb has told me that, a lot of people think their book is done, and then she goes, no, you got about another year or so on that, if you're going to do it, and have a really nice work when you get done. Something that you can leave that is historical in nature. And this certainly did qualify as it went into the Smithsonian.
Oh, yeah. The collection that we worked with to do the book. Hey, Chris, do you want to hold up one of the two books over there? Either one of them. You'll just see a lot of graphics in it, but it's part of a collection. And I'll tell you, one of the goals, I think one of my driving forces in making sure this book got done, even if it hurt, and no matter how long it took, and no matter how crazy we felt at times, I wanted this collection to be protected. There were so many things in there that were so rare and about a time in history and in our country's history that we don't understand. Because shortly after these events, the communists took over China, and they lost history. During the Cultural Revolution, they lost the history. It's not waiting over there to be found. Some of it was destroyed. And certainly here, World War II history is disappearing as family collections are disappearing. So I was very motivated, and we went, really thanks to Chris, he made the appointment. We went to the Smithsonian, we showed him the book, and we showed him the collection, and they said 3 beautiful words: we want it. If you were offering this, we want it. And then they said this other beautiful thing, which is, who designed this book? It's beautiful.
The glow was blinding.
Yes, the glow was like, what? That would be me. Do you like it?
And I understand you had Adam help you a little bit too, so let's give him some credit, you know.
Adam did many of the photos. You guys, if you've seen family photos, the ones from the 70s turn yellow, and the ones from the 30s are often water marked and ribbed, and we're put in photo books where when you take them off, the back is, you know, there's a lot of trouble. Letters, all that kind of stuff, and all those pieces, 30,000 pieces in this collection. We had to go through them, and my son Adam is photo processing and correcting, doing all that. And maybe Chris helped a little on that too.
So what would you say this experience changed the most about you as a writer, as a person? Because this was a year-long event. I mean, so I would guess it changed the way you look at a lot of things.
God, the most. Boy, it's so hard to say. It was an adventure. It was a hero's journey, and I'm using it as a metaphor during my talk, but it was a hero's journey. I was transformed because I did something that ended up in the Smithsonian, and it sold copies, and people wanted us to speak, and it was very different being a little girl from South Dakota who had a little small press, and then being at the Smithsonian. Or my co-author spoke at the World War II History Museum in New Orleans, and I got to go to Taiwan and get treated like a princess. And anybody that wants to hear complete details, I am happy to tell you the whole story. But I don't know what about me changed the most, but I know I'm considerably more cosmopolitan about my politics. I think I learned a lot about how complicated reality is, and how hard it is to believe something simple like communists are bad, or communists are good, or the Japanese were terrible, or the Japanese were this, or American. It was harder. The more I knew, the less absolute it was. So maybe more open-minded and a little less, what is that word when you live in a small place in the Shire and you've never been out in the great big world?
It's called a hobbit.
Maybe you have really wide square feet, yeah.
Well, I'm going to step away. I think that we've talked enough here, just as, kind of whet everybody's appetite, because Barb has a wonderful presentation ready for you all. And as you can tell, she is a person that prepares and always maybe a little bit over prepares, but I'll be here to guide her along.
Yeah.
So we're going to hand it over to Barb Evenson at this time.
Anyone has permission to go like this when I get too deep into something. When I started this project, I was an editor and a publisher. I was publishing books. We had started Black Hills Books Press to create books by, about, or of interest to South Dakotans. So imagine what doesn't fall into that category. Okay, so of interest to is really kind of a thing. So I was expecting text, like most editors, and and fiction. So next, I want to go just a little bit to the side and just remind all of us a little bit about the hero's journey, because it's the classic fiction writing device. It's the storytelling. And the hero's journey is pretty simple. If you've seen Lord of the Rings, or Star Wars, or read a fairy tale, or anything, because there's some normal guy in the normal world, and suddenly he's in the middle of a spy story. And all these strange things happen, and he has all these trials and struggles, and he meets a wizard who gives him special knowledge, or he finds a treasure, or there's some weird thing in his hand and he can't figure out how to use it, whatever. And then he goes through trials and struggles, and when he gets through that, he's transformed. That transformation changes him, it changes the world. A lot of times it saves the little forest people. I mean, a lot of things happen. And then he gets to go home, and he's headed home, and then some other bad things happen. What do I need to do? Stay this way.
This way, right?
Move this way.
Yeah, there you go.
Here, let's just put this where I
So block
can't.
you.
Yeah, let's just put this where I can't go. There. Is that better?
You're in the front now, yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think it's pretty classic, but we're looking at this because I'd like you to look at this and say, do you like the colors, and do you think it helps you understand the hero's journey a bit? Okay. And then the next slide, this is the same thing, only it's done all in text. There's more information. How many of you prefer this one? How many of you like the pretty colors? Because there's kind of a thing about us, okay? Here's my favorite. And that's where maybe the graphic isn't quite as pretty, but it explains it. There's a little bit of humanity in there. There's a little guy. That's our hero. It's a hero's journey. It's not a color wheels journey. And over to the right, a little more description that's readable and not at angles. But my favorite, over to the left, a quote, an inspiring quote. A quote that says, we hope to be better. The reason that we respond to the hero's journey is because all of us are hoping to be our better selves. So I'm going to use that metaphor because first, I think it's true for all of us that we're all on a hero's journey. And second, because it seemed to fit everywhere. So there's my hero's journey, because I had to leave the Shire and go far away to exotic places like Alabama and San Francisco and Bethesda and Taiwan, don't forget Taiwan, and various things. And I had to find my way back home. Tonight, I'm here. So, bringing that wisdom back to home is part of it. So, my hero's journey, how a South Dakota girl became obsessed with aviation in World War II, China. The first part of a hero's journey starts with home. The ordinary world. And as everyone who knows me in the room can testify, I'm completely uninterested in reality, so we're just skipping past that. Don't care. But to summarize my life, I think you should try stuff, you should volunteer with fun people, and you never know where that path might go. So try them. The real story starts with a phone call. Billy McDonald, the son of Mac McDonald, this guy, called me and he said, my friend Peggy tells me that you could edit her, and she had dyslexia and she had trouble leaving words out of sentences. She tells me that you can help me edit. I said, well, yeah, I can help you edit. And then he said, I'm going to send you the manuscript. It's a 600-page manuscript. He has obviously worked so hard on this. How many of you have written 600-page manuscripts? Anybody? A couple of, yeah, a couple of you. Writers. He's worked really hard on it, but when I look at it, I see quotes missing. I see misquoted books. I see missing citations. He wants to write an authoritative history of this era in China because he wants to honor his father, and he wants to write the best book. He has obviously worked so hard, and he tells me, you know, I look at this and I think, oh, I can't do this. The person that does this needs to be sitting beside him, and you know where this is going, right? Needs to be sitting beside him in Alabama, where you can look at the books and correct the citations, and look at the letters he's transcribed and correct them, and check all the dates, and rescan all the and I'm thinking, I can't do it. Classic hero's journey. I refuse the call. I can't do it. You need to find somebody there. He goes, I've already done that. You're the 4th editor. And they couldn't do it. But Peggy tells me that you are the person for this job. And he asked me to take a brief trip to Alabama. You know, he's a sales guy. Oh. He's a sales guy, and he says, okay, well, just make it a short trip. Come down for a month, come down for a couple months, look at it. And I think, I can't leave this shire. It's so beautiful. I have all these lovely friends and family. The Black Hills. And I love my sunsets. I can't do it. And then he makes an offer I can't refuse. I'll pay you, I'll pay all your expenses, and you can live in my fabulous home, and we will take care of everything. We'll pay all your expenses, we'll get you whatever you need, and you got carte blanche to do what you need to do. And I am here to tell you as an editor, no author ever tells you that. I had to go. So I answered the call. This is the kind of graphic design I'd been doing as part of it. I was learning the Creative Suite, the Adobe products. And this was the kind of graphic design. And this was one of my favorite quotes, which I looked at as I was on the phone with him and thought, I will take this journey. I will go on this. And my favorite quote, life upon life, we're all too little. Why not? So I jump. I go to Alabama, and I meet Billy McDonald, who is, I don't know, beyond fabulous. This is a guy who has dyslexia, has trouble reading, is not super secure, but he is a pro golf guy. He was in the British Pro-Am. He's a great athlete. He has that kind of confidence. But he undertook a lot because he wanted to honor his father. He was so driven. 5 years of research, and he is a storyteller. He told me about finding 16 boxes of his father's papers in his sister's basement, moldering and wet. And he peeled off pages of letters and blow-dried them and laid them out all over. He wrote all over the world to museums and libraries to try to collect information about his dad. And what he discovered, and maybe you've had this experience, he didn't really know his father. He knew his father as a guy that went to the office and published stuff and came home and golfed on the weekends and, grilled. He didn't know much about his father. He found his father in these boxes. So I look at this collection, the stuff he spent 5 years collecting, everything he's done. Everything he's done. And then he takes me into the room, rather the several rooms where he's collected it. And this is the dragon's hoard. This is the pirate's chest. This is every beautiful, this is the best guitar you've ever seen, just sitting there. This is the Holy Grail. It is the most beautiful and large and amazing and unique collection that I could ever hope as an editor to look at and to be able to illustrate a manuscript with. I think, we're going to have such great photos in this manuscript. And just some of the things, but there, for example, do you see all those neat, tidy folders? He had trouble doing that. It was hard for him, but he did it. But look at all of those. Imagine how many individual pieces of paper are in there. Keep going. A couple more examples. books that his dad had published about China, and manuscript. This is a logbook where they were in China training Chinese fighters to fight the Japanese, and he's writing in longhand in these fading books. It's so romantic, so beautiful. But first, the 600. Yes, the first thing we had to do, as fun as the collection was, the first thing we had to have 600 pages edited, and so we did that. We spent a couple months struggling. We met people. We encountered difficulties. We also went to Rivendell for breakfast quite often. And remember, all of my meals were provided. All I had to do was say, "I'd like a," and it would appear at my desk. It was, hereditary wealth is amazing. It really is. You should go back and be born into a rich family. It's got to be. I spent most of my time here, fondly referred to as the dungeon. Occasionally I was let off my leash. That's Billy, and that on the left is me. His wife Nancy is not in these pictures, but she figures greatly in this, more toward the end of the story, really. But after a couple months, we're not getting anywhere on this manuscript. It's still full of errors, things are still out of order, and it's 600 pages. And one night I go to bed, just suffering with this, and I have a dream, or maybe a vision, and I go down to Billy for the lovely breakfast provided for us, and I say, "Billy, how would you feel if we took the 600-page manuscript and pitched it?" And he kept listening. And I said, which is unusual, how many authors really like it when you say that? They don't like it. But he listened. So I said, let's let your dad's letters are wonderful. Let's let your dad speak for himself. Your dad is a wonderful writer. He's a photographer. There are newspaper people who have interviewed him. There are newspaper articles everywhere about the things that he did. There are books written that mention him. Why are we trying to tell his story? Okay? And Billy, to his credit, and in the most generous act I have ever seen out of an author, I said, "What do you think?" And he said, "I think it will be a better book." So that's the pause. That was the pause. You're a little ahead.
But you were
That's the
covered.
pause. He said he thought it would be a better book. And remember that he is paying me there to be an editor to edit his book. And Billy, I think, was a storyteller as much more than a writer, if I may be so bold. He was able to feel the heartbeat of every story. When he told stories, they were wonderful and riveting, and you could see the airplanes flying, and you could see the rivers running, and you could see the crashes, and you could see it. But when he wrote, he couldn't do that. When his father wrote, you could see it. His father wrote letters home every 2 weeks for 11 years from China. But it started when he was a little kid, When he was a little kid, he wrote this first letter, and he said, "My favorite subject is geography," which was true. "My least favorite subject is math. Please talk to my friends, and I love you all." And that's the way he was his entire life. He loved geography and travel and flying. Really didn't like math, and it caused him problems. He kept his friends very close. He worked hard, and he loved his family. He also wrote letters from China in the middle of a war zone when he's getting bombed. He writes letters that say things like, "Well, if it gets really bad, we'll come home. Yeah, it wasn't that bad. There were only 66 hits on the field today. The Japanese can't hit the side of a barn. We're fine. We're fine. And he got those home to his family. And his mom, who you see down there, carefully preserved all of them. How many of you guys have stuff like that in your house? Anybody? Careful. Do you wish you had it? Yeah. Anyway, so Billy's got a collection of his dad's letters, and we call the senior McDonald Mac Donald because Chenault called him Mac, and then we call my co-author Billy just in case it's getting confusing. He was a keen observer of what was going on, and because he was sitting right next to the people doing things, like he was sitting right next to Chenault or interacting with Chiang Kai-shek or flying Hemingway, because he was right there, he often had insight that maybe you wouldn't get out of a newspaper article. This letter in particular, I'm just going to read it. This is only the beginning. This is just after the Japanese have started the war. This is only the beginning. If Japan is allowed to continue this conquest, it will only be a matter of years before she tries to take the Hawaiian Islands. He wrote that December 6, 1937. It's not the only thing that in these letters you would think, how did he know? How did he see that?
4 years later.
I know, isn't that right? Yeah, December 6th. And maybe if you offset it for, I know it's kind of eerie, isn't it? So the letters, I don't know if you notice this about people, but they'll argue about what the facts are. You know, you've seen that sometimes. And I kind of knew that some of the stuff that was going to be said in this book, people would argue about it. There's, for you World War II flying geeks, there's an argument over whether Chenault was in combat, whether Americans were in combat against the Japanese in China before America joined the war. We have things in here that maybe speak to that, but we put in what we had so that other people could look at it and maybe make up their own minds. So for a couple of reasons. One, because there are some controversies about history. We don't always know. We wanted to put in the real stuff, what his parents were getting or what he was seeing, the papers that went across his desk. However, having this brilliant idea, if I say so myself, did not, one of the parts of the hero's journey is you think you've got it made and then the work starts. So we had 30,000 items, roughly estimated, to sort through, to process, to clean up, to make sure we had the rights for it, to call somebody and say, hey, do you mind if we quote from your from your uncle's unpublished manuscript of 1952? We had a lot to do on each little thing. There are over 500 pieces in this book. In the final book, which is kind of like this one. Yeah, the big one. I mean, kind of like this. Yeah, we had to do stuff with everything. So there was a lot. But we did it. And of course, it was just the two of us sitting in a room. We had, as you know, a gigantic Worthy Quest takes a fellowship, and we had one. And on the screen are some names. I'm going to say Mimi and Lee were staff members from Black Hills Books, and they held down the fort while I was gone. My mom, Bonnie, over here. Of course, you get credit for me being here, but also she works her tail off reading books and manuscripts, and my son Adam worked hard on it. We had 3 people, Scott, Tom, and Anton, who worked hard reviewing the manuscripts and fact-checking and all that kind of stuff. We had this guy who was the son of a pilot in China from the same era, who I had met at the conventions for these people, and he struck me as being a very worthwhile individual to know. He was very smart and knew a lot, and had a lot of facts at his disposal. He was really passionately interested in the subject. He was the best editor I've ever met. He loved making maps. I mean, what would any editor do? I did what any sensible publisher editor would do. I put a ring on it. I made sure I knew where he was when we had a manuscript to edit. And then, of course, Billy and Nancy, who, if I haven't conveyed it, were lovely to work with and remarkable people. So, yeah, pause here. These are because I need to breathe and I forget to. So, in this next section, and you can see it's kind of an artifice for me to use the hero's journey on this, and yet it fits. It was remarkable how well it fit. And I think that's because people are on hero's journeys all the time. You're just sitting there in your living room and you get a call from someone and the world goes kablooey and you end up where you didn't expect to be, and it's never as easy to get to the airport or get home from the train or going down shopping as it should have been, and then you get back to your living room and you think, I know. I think we do that a lot. But in this guy's case, his hero's journey is pretty much what you'd think would be in a movie. So as you see this book, I'd like you to think about it as if it were a movie, because I think what we were trying to do, what Billy excels at, is storytelling, kind of scene by scene. He would say, he'd tell a story about a dog. Chenault had a dog, and the dog went into the water after a bird of some kind. But the way he tells it, it was amazing, you know. So we went story by story through, but over the whole thing is this character arc. So he starts out being an ordinary kid in Birmingham, Alabama, kind of a little town outside Birmingham, which is an iron-making steel town. And he has no prospects, really. He is an Eagle Scout, and he likes to swim. So those are his 2 credits. But he sees a plane. This is in an era when planes were, you know, kind of like spaceships, I think, for us. He sees a plane and he decides, that's what I want to do. And he joins the Army, and it doesn't work out. They say, Bob, you know, you can work at an air base, but you're not going to fly. Eventually, perseverance, he gets into the pilot's program, and he meets his mentor, the wizard, the guy who knows everything. He meets Claire Chenault, and he spends essentially the rest of his life as the wingman for Chenault. At the end of Chenault's life, he is one of the pallbearers. He follows Claire Chenault to the ends of the earth, which at that time was China. So Chenault trains him to be one of the best fighter pilots in the world. They have trouble in the military. Chenault is a controversial figure. He's trying to push for fighter planes, and a lot of people were fighting for bombers, and he was getting pushed out, and his aerobatics team, which these guys joined 3 men in the Flying Trapeze was the name of it, and they were big hits at air shows. They were like the Blue Angels today. They were the predecessors of that. They did amazing things and nobody could believe that they could do them. And Chenault was busy trying to prove that fighter pilots were still important and that the Army should still have a fighter pilot program. And he lost. And when he lost, his 2 co-pilots, his 2 wingmen, the Chinese came looking for people to looking for people to train the Chinese pilots because they knew Japan was coming for them. And Japan had a modern army, a well-equipped army, almost a magically important army. They had no chance against the might of the Japanese. They'd never lost. The Japanese never lost. And China was just still stuck in a feudal era, not industrialized, vast sections of it, still ox carts and long gowns and handwritten things. And he went to train the pilots. He goes to China, he and his Mary Fellowship there. They go to China to train fighter pilots. Yep. And on the way, they train fighter pilots. But Chenault shows up in 1937. So he went in 1936. Chenault shows up in 37. They did a little spying in Tokyo, he and Mac did. Then he shows up and they do a journey. They take a trip across China, which you can see in the map. Thank you, Chris. They take a trip across China to check out the air base. And Chenault has been there a few weeks when Japan and China go to war. The incident at the Marco Polo Bridge, which is really the first incident in World War II. So, Mac and his friends trained Chinese fighter pilots, and almost by the end of 1937, they were gone. They were dead. The Chinese Air Force was non-existent. They fought for 2 years, but they're gone. The Japanese war machine has rolled over what it needed to roll over. Go ahead and see that. Yeah, it's pretty.
Train.
Yeah, training. Yeah, they continued training for 2 years, but by this is where Chris comes in. 1940, like many heroes, Mac decided to leave his mentor, to leave Chenault, and go to work for a commercial airline called CNAC, still in China. He thought about leaving China. Many heroes think about going home and quitting, but he decided to stay in China, and he decided to go to work for CNAC. Here you'll see, it was a great job. He was so excited about this job. He'd been training people in the hinterlands, and then they all died, and he felt kind of discouraged, and like many heroes do. And then he gets to fly where people land, and the tail of the airplane is in the Yangtze River. He thought that would be fun. In the lower right, down here, you can see this is the landing strip in the Yangtze River. These are the mountains you have to fly over and then miss those high wires there and then drop down quick and land on that short thing in the middle of the Yangtze. Oh, it was great, he said. How did he say that exactly? Oh, they sure, CNAC is a good company and they sure do interesting work. He also said, this is a job with a future. That's what he thought. You also see that he has relocated from, the remote forests, the hinterlands, and he is now in Hong Kong, which is a British territory. You'll notice that here they get to go out on yachts with, people, and he gets to play tennis at clubs, and there's some dinner jackets, and I believe there's a little drinking going on. And he's really enjoying this. He's having a great time. It's fun. It's interesting work. Oh, yeah, map again. Hong Kong is a island off the coast of China, and you can see up there, Chongqing, that was now the capital of China because the Japanese had taken each port out of play, so China was being isolated. It was becoming harder and harder for China, and the railroads you see on there, but airfare was becoming more and more important, airlines were. So he loved this, it was interesting work, and there were a few dangers, like Japanese fighter pilots might shoot you down. This is one where they took out part of the plane, and you'll notice that the two wings are different sizes because they couldn't get parts. know. So, but they sure do interesting work. Okay. And then everything was going great, and then it was December of 1941. And after Pearl Harbor, a few hours later, they bombed Hong Kong, which is where he was based out of, and where they had clubs and dinner jackets and nice yachts and things. They bombed Hong Kong, and 8 CNEC pilots, including Mac, flew over enemy lines. They went back and forth over the Japanese lines at night to pick up people that had been left in Hong Kong and to fly them out over the Japanese. And 8 pilots made all of these trips in and out over Japanese line, over Japanese flag for 3 days.
3 nights.
3 nights, yes, 3 nights. And he wrote letters home, go back one. He wrote letters home about it, and people wrote letters home about him, and people wrote newspaper stories all over the world about the heroics of these 8 pilots and the dastardliness of the Japanese who had bombed. And it was a big story, and Billy was in the middle of it. His mother and dad didn't find out for how many weeks, I think almost a month, they didn't find out whether he had lived or not. He wrote an 8-page letter, but it couldn't go out. They didn't know, nobody knew. So, but he stayed. You would think he would think about going home, but he said, I can't leave China now that she needs us the most. So he didn't go home, and he stayed with CNEC, but CNEC became militarized. They were able to do military missions. They were able to fly military goods, gold and guns and gasoline, things in short supply, because again, the Japanese have isolated China. I had someone more thing. The most critical thing I think that CNEC did was pioneer the routes over the hump. And the hump was about the only place China could go for goods. They went out to India and back, and they flew over some amazing mountains, the Himalayas, the highest mountains in the world, the worst weather, planes not really good at flying. You know, there were so many things. And here is an example of us trying to tell this thing that I can't explain in words very well, how frightening it was, what the weather was like, all of that. And we're trying to show how long a trip they had to make in a time when they didn't really have the kind of equipment we do now. They didn't have beacons that would not go offline. They didn't have radio equipment that was bomb-proof. Some of them weren't able to land in the dark. There were all kinds of things that weren't the way they are now. And we're trying to illustrate that with this part. And that's, I'm going to say, back up one, will you? Thanks. So, because I think it's not a well-known period, and it's hard for someone like me, again, reality, not very interesting to me, I really wanted to explain to the sons and daughters of people who had been there what had actually happened, what their fathers or uncles or grandfathers had really gone through. And so we brought in Chris because he has particular expertise in visualizing in 3D space, in mapping. He understands photographs. He's fastidious about explaining technical details. And as you'll see in the book, there's quite a bit of that. And that would be completely due to him, and not due to me or Billy. He stays with CNEC through the war, and after the war, really right up until the time when communist China is going to collapse. And still following the hero's journey, he eventually marries a princess, an heiress from an insurance company fortune, and he goes home. And he has a relatively productive life. But like many heroes, he doesn't talk about it. His kids don't know. Billy has no idea until he finds his father in those 16 boxes. There's a pause is the next slide. Let's just stop there. What I want to say here is that if you have stories to tell, there is not just one way to tell them. Fiction is not the only way. Long tomes of text, not the only way. I would say a family scrapbook that you work hard on, that tells you your story, that's great. If it helps people see the heart of the story, the truth of your family, I think that's the best you can do. Billy wanted to honor his father, and remarkably enough, after, I don't know if you can see all of the things that we've done here, including a lot of marketing under the name Ghost Tiger, and then somebody says, you can't really call it Ghost Tiger in China, they won't like it. So, a name change. We finally end up with a book. Let's go to the next one. Here's our reward. When we started, it seemed simple. It was not. But it was worth the effort. And we thought we were done, because of course we had a book. And it's, you know, it's an hour, so I'm supposed to stop now. But no! We have a couple more slides. In the Classic Hero's Journey, you get a lot of benefits. You have the fellowship, you have the stories you can tell your friends and family. I got to work on related books. Did I tell you I got to go to Taiwan? I get treated. You know, I even got the best editor I've ever met out of it, and I know right where he is. We also got that collection into the Smithsonian, which, just as a person who loves history and loves artifacts, I gotta tell you, that's a pretty huge thing to know that those things we worked on and were so careful with, or that I looked horrified while people picked them up without white gloves on their hand, that all of them are now saved, and for, I think, as well as you can expect things. Now, I'm going to tell you that our journey's over. You know, we've done, and I think we're done, and I think I'm headed home. And then, in a hero's journey, the 11th step is atonement, because you've been weak, you've been lazy, you know, that's marketing. So, that's when you got to try to get the book that honors this fine man and all of those people. This is when you got to get people to read it, and you want to figure out how to do that. And that is a very long hero's journey of its own, which we will not go into tonight. But it is a whole other hero's journey to do that. Go ahead. In our particular case, people liked it. We sold some. We did get some awards. We got filmmakers called still, you know, because people are always going to make another documentary about Chenault and the Flying Tigers. So we still get calls from them. I get to work on other books about this era, and this gives me a little credibility. So they say, well, you know everything. No, I don't know everything. Chris does, though. That's what I say. And I'm done. So what I'd like to say in summary is that this book reflects what I know or think I know about designing for audiences, for people to love reading. When people pick this book up, they look through it, and they often buy it. And that's important if you want to do another book, or if you want to get your story told. So I'm going to make an argument that this is a good way to do a book. This may not be the best book that you could do this way, I won't argue that. But I think it's good to use visuals. And in particular, I think it's good to work with what you've got. If you've got your grandmother's journal, start from that. Try to let her tell her own story as much as possible. try to let the photos and the quaint collections of doilies, let them speak for themselves. So, anything else that I should say?
You got it.
I listen to them all the time.
I say you should say thank